When you think of the basic druid, you probably think of Circle of the Land. However, that doesn't mean that this subclass cannot be fun to play. With this subclass, you can become the best spellcaster a druid could be. So, without further ado, I'm going to tell you why you should play Circle of the Land Druid. This guide is based on my personal experiences. I will not be going over basic subclass information, y'all can probably read. I've played or DM'd for all the druid subclasses, my opinions probably do not align with the D&D community at large. I'm going to be giving rankings for subclasses based on 5 criteria. Role-playing potential, spellcasting, wild shaping, utility, and the X factor, or something different that the subclass brings to the table that is unique from all the other subclasses. Each druid subclass feature can gain 5 points in each category. However, the later in level a class feature is gotten, the more heavily it will be scrutinized. Since most parties never reach 10th level, abilities that come after 10th level won't be given as much weight. Alright, with that out of the way, let's begin. The first thing that you have to consider about this subclass is that it's just great at spellcasting. It is the spellcasting druid. From 2nd to 3rd level, this subclass gets 3 features to buff spellcasting. A myth with all druids is that they start off slow, but Circle of the Land by no means starts off slow because it gives you a lot of power right away. Firstly, you're going to get bonus cantrip, which I think speaks for itself. Then you're going to get natural recovery, which allows you to recover spell slots equal to half your druid level rounded up, but the spell slots can't be greater than 6th level. You can recover these spell slots on a short rest, so what I look at this as, it's really good for those random to small encounters as you're leading up to a boss fight where you can use some spells without feeling like you're hampering yourself for later fights. Basically, you just don't have to hold back as much in these smaller encounters for fear that you're going to be missing out on bigger spell slots later on. And then of course you get your circle spells, which are their whole own separate thing and can range from incredibly powerful to mid-tier. I don't think there are any bad circles, but there are definitely some lackluster ones. But overall, you will not find a better druid subclass to help you with your spellcasting power. Next, I just want to point out that I think that this is the best beginner druid subclass because it lets a new druid player go through the class at their own pace. The only mechanic you really need to learn is the druid spellcasting mechanic, and everything else is kinda optional to the subclass. If a new player wants to play druid, I recommend this subclass, since Circle of the Moon, which is technically a little bit simpler, forces them to use their wild shape effectively. And I know for new players, wild shape can be a difficult concept to wrap their head around sometimes. And that's why I'm recommending Circle of the Land Druid to basically all new druid players. And by new, I mean people who have no concept of the subclass or are maybe just completely new to D&D. If you've played D&D a lot before, then you can go for some more complicated druid subclasses, but if you are just brand new starting out or have never looked at a druid before, Circle of the Land is my recommendation. The next benefit, and some people might fight me over this one, but you know what, this is a hill I'm willing to die on, is that you control your DM with Land Stride because it allows you to walk through your own hazardous terrain. Now, there is a lot of contention with how Land Stride interacts with plant growth, spike growth, etc. So let me set the record straight right here, right now. Verbatim, Land Stride says, moving through non-magical, difficult terrain costs you no extra movement. You can also pass through non-magical plants without being slowed by them, and without taking damage from them if they have thorn spines or a similar hazard. Plant growth does not create magical plants. It simply grows the existing plant life per the spell. Therefore, Land Stride applies to plant growth. This is true for spike growth as well. You use non-magical components to cast this spell. You are growing non-magical plants with magic. Sorry if I seem a little heated, but this is a conversation that I've had a lot with people online, and this is how I try to explain it. If you light a stick on fire with magic, you don't all of a sudden get a magical torch. You've used magic, but the result is a non-magical item or object. The magic grows the plants, but they are not innately magical. They're plants that you grew. It makes 0 sense to rule that the spell creates magical plants and goes against all pre-existing notions of spell effects in D&D 5th edition. People who say otherwise are DMs that really just want to artificially nerf land druids, or people who just haven't thought that far enough ahead. There, I said what I said. You can, rules as written, use Landstride in tandem with your spells, and it's awesome. Frankly, I don't even know why this is a discussion, because as a DM, Circle of the Land doesn't get a lot of cool extra stuff like all the other Druid subclasses. Why would you try to artificially nerf this feature and make it basically unusable? Like, you would be able to use this feature, I don't know, once through all of the campaign with this? I don't know, maybe I'm just too stupid to grasp the god tier intellect of some of these other DMs. But, moving on, another reason why you should definitely play this subclass is you have access to so many unique spells. You get access to the cleric-only spell, Divination, the wizard artificer spell, Pass Wall, the wizard's acid arrow, many other powerful spells like Haste, Cone of Cold, Lightning Bolt, and the list goes on. All these are tied to different druid circles, but they are still options that you can pick and choose at your own whim. These spells allow a druid to be so multifaceted and useful, and I'm really in awe that a lot of people don't see their benefit. Well, I shouldn't be in awe, because when I was first starting out as a druid player, I didn't understand the power of some of these circles. I did not realize just how good some of these spells were until I actually started playing and running for more Circle of the Land Druids and found out, oh, wait a minute, these circles are really, really good. So I'm going to walk you through the 3 best of them, at least in my opinion. So the best circle in my opinion isn't even close, and it's Circle of the Grassland. You get spells like Invisibility, Pass Without Trace, Haste, Divination, Dream, Insect Plague, and a few other mess spells, but you're coming for those spells that I just listed. The core lineup is top tier. Invisibility and Pass Without Trace need literally no explanation. Everyone knows how good they are, and just being prepared for free, that's incredible. Haste is one of the best buffs in the game. Getting it is incredible, especially if you cast it on a frontline martial character. As I've talked about, druids are extremely survivable, and Constitution is probably going to be up there in your list of ability scores, so you'll be able to keep concentration on that haste and really help out your martial fighters. Next up is probably one of the most overlooked spells in all of D&D, Divination. You just get to ask your DM a question. No, seriously, look at the spell. That's what it fucking does. You just get to ask them a question. It's not even yes or no. They just give a truthful response to your question. I am beyond shocked that more players don't take this spell. It is god tier. Also, it's a ritual spell, so you don't need to waste a 4th level spell slot. I swear to God that this spell is wildly broken, and more clerics need to use it. Do you know how many TPKs I've saved by using this spell? Do you know how many TPKs another player who's cast this spell and asked a question to me that they were able to save? Because I was able to just straight up tell them, this is a terrible idea, you are about to get yourselves killed. Dream is great for sending messages or threats. I really like it for role-playing purposes, and a lot of players do too. Insect Plague is slept on. It's great because almost no creatures are resistant to magical piercing damage. Plus, the area becomes difficult terrain, so enemies are locked down, which, you know, I always love. Second and third place in no particular order are Circles of the Mountain and the Underdark. Mountain gives you solid options across the board, including Lightning Bolt and Pass Wall. Underdark has great movement and damage options. It starts off a bit slow, but later level stuff like Cloud Kill are tremendously powerful. The one thing holding it back is its slow start, because again, most D&D parties don't make it past 6th level, so you're not really going to be experiencing those high level options a ton. I mean, statistically that is. Although if you're in a D&D party that you trust and you know that your DM is going to take it to those higher levels, yeah, Underdark can compete with Grasslands, certainly. But really, all of the circles are fine. As long as you don't take Coast, you're good. But like, seriously, Coast just sucks. If you're in a water-based campaign, even then, don't take Coast. Just go Swamp. Coast just gives you nothing special, really. But now let's move on to concepts and what we can do with our Circle of the Land Druids. Circle of the Land, more than any other Druid circle, are literally tied to the land. They're rooted in their home. Is their home a Druid grove? Did your Druid live alone or with others? Where you're from is very important when you're building Circle of the Land Druid, so really think about that starting location for your character. They might also take on aspects of the land that they're from. If they're from the grassland, are they going to be tricked out with all these different types of grasses or flowers? If they're from the Underdark, are they wearing crystal perhaps? Who knows, but really incorporate that land's type, so when someone sees your druid, they're like, ah, that's where you're from. You're from the mountains, you're from the Underdark, you're from the coast, but still. And honestly, for this reason, I would recommend trying to start your Circle of the Land Druid, at least with this circle, at 3rd level, at the very minimum 2nd, because you want to know where you're from. You want to incorporate that into your backstory, which sucks, because this is such a good beginner druid, but you really don't want to start this particular subclass at 1st level. There's some clashing of concepts there that really sadden me. One final thing to note is that usually Circle of the Land, depending on your home, can be a bit sheltered. They're, particular to that certain biome. So your druid can have this fish out of water mentality where they don't know a lot about the outside world. They know a lot about where they're from, but everywhere else is kind of a mystery to them. And not only is that a gift to you as a player, because you can go and explore and roleplay this person who really doesn't know anything very well, especially useful to a new player, but it's great for a DM because that allows you to convey a lot of lore and a lot of backstory through this character because you're going to be asking questions. With concepts out of the way, let's move on to multiclassing. And as for multiclassing, honestly, just don't do it. Multiclassing isn't going to help you. Land actually gets the most out of the high-level druid class features. Obviously, monk is never a bad choice to multiclass with as a druid, but barbarian here is terrible. Rage prevents spell casting, which is your primary function. I guess if your charisma is high enough, you could consider multiclassing into sorcerer to add a little bit of spice, but in my opinion, just go straight druid for this subclass. It's going to get you more in the end. Now we're going to move into my dislikes or kind of maybe letdowns for this subclass. Firstly, you have weak later level abilities. Consider talking to your DM about getting something different for your druid. If you make it to level 10 or 14, you probably have a lot of character history already built up, so maybe ask your DM if you can do something specific to your character. Or heck, just steal another druid subclass feature of equivalent or lower level. Reflavor it if you have to, but these options are just a little bit underwhelming, and I wouldn't blame a druid player for wanting to swap them out. Next, there are just no compliments to Wild Shape. It's like a forgotten feature with this subclass, and maybe Wizards, when they were designing the druid, really just focused on the Wild Shape feature for the Circle of the Moon, but it being completely left out in Circle of the Land just kind of hurts. And my next point I've kind of touched on a lot throughout this video, working my way around it, but this subclass has unclear and outdated design. Landstride is worded poorly. Other subclasses just get more features. It just needs a little bit of polish to bring it up to standard either by your DM or by Wizards themselves within errata. But that's not to say you're not going to have fun playing this circle. I've had players who've had fun playing a Circle of the Land Druid up to 14th, 15th level, but I just wish that there was a little bit more there. And finally, my last point, I think it's just lacking a strong core concept. The fantasy for Circle of the Land is stock, bland. It's your druid, and they leave it at that. I'd like a little bit more flavoring as a player and a DM for later level features, basically level 6 and up, that add more to role-playing potential, while also not being so niche that you might never see them and your feature might never be used. I promise you, I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen the Circle of the Land Druid's 14th level ability, Nature Sanctuary, be used. It doesn't come up. Because honestly, at 14th level, why are you still throwing beasts at a character? Or plants, but I never really even see plants at any level. And with that, let's move on to the ratings. Role-playing is an 8 out of 20. It has some thematic features in there. It has Circle of Spells, it has Landstride, and I have to admit that some of the later level abilities do have a little bit of role-playing potential, but it all feels very stock and bland. Spellcasting is a 20 out of 20. I think that this is pretty obvious. Circle of the Land does much of its work to benefit a druid spellcasting potential, so of course it's 20 out of 20. This is the best spellcasting druid. On the other hand, Wild Shape is a 0 out of 20 because this subclass literally does nothing for the druid's Wild Shape. For utility, you get a 14 out of 20. Circle of Spells helps a lot. Land Stride, depending on how you run it, helps a lot. You get your bonus cantrips, you get your natural recovery. This subclass does give utility, however, it's not picking up those later level options because honestly, they have 0 utility. So for that reason, it's just a little bit above average in terms of utility. And finally, for the X Factor, 7 out of 20, because this subclass really doesn't do a lot special. It adds a little bit with its spellcasting. Plant Growth and Spike Growth add a lot because you're able to use Land Stride with it. You're able to have all of these new circle spells that you wouldn't normally get as a druid, but it's just not enough. Other druid subclasses are far more unique, so this is just subpar when it comes to being different and standing out. Now, for this being a beginner druid subclass, this necessarily isn't a bad thing as you're still learning. You wouldn't want an X Factor off the charts, but still, you're limited. And remember, these ratings are all based on my personal opinions. You might view this subclass extremely differently from me, but from my time running and playing Circle of the Land, these are just my ratings. So at the end of the day, I'm grading this subclass as a 54 out of 100. It's basically your bog standard druid. Like, this is the level that all druid subclasses need to essentially meet for them to be good subclasses. And I do genuinely believe that this is a good druid subclass. It just needs to be revamped a little bit. The core ideas are there, but I wish it was just a bit more thematic. However, I'm saddened by DMs and other players turning, potential druid players away from this subclass because it's the easiest to learn and it will probably get them into playing more druids. Because I tell you what, if you throw Circle of the Stars or Circle of the Shepherd at a new player, they are never going to be playing a druid again because those are so much more complicated. Maybe a veteran player could handle it, but they'll still struggle. So despite this not being an exemplary druid subclass, it's still one that I wholeheartedly recommend, and I want to really make that clear in this video. But if you're still looking for more druid content, check out this video right here, and thank you all for entering the dungeon.